Haptics Club podcast. I'm Ashley from Titan Haptics. I'm joined by my Haptics crew. We've got Eric and Sarah from Interhaptics, Manu from Unity, Heist and Irina from Sense Glove. The Haptics Club is a team of people with a passion for haptics. Our goal is to raise awareness of all the amazing people and tech that is happening in the space and help foster discussions around the subject. We are happy for yet another season of Haptics Club, and we've got the craziest, most surprising guest this season, which is awesome. And speaking of that, right now we're joined with Thomas Müller. He's the founder of hapticsclub.io. He's also a product and UX designer at TU Dresden. And there's so much to talk about. Within this period of time, we're going to start with, we have an hour. We're going to do a 5-minute intro, 15 minutes in the area of expertise, 10 minutes on the future of haptics. Ooh, love that subject one. Love that so much. And of course, we'll cover all the challenges and opportunities in the space in the haptics industry. Around the 30-minute mark, we'll stop the recording and open the floor to the audience and guest questions that we have. And of course, we'll be ready for that. And anyone who's listening to this right now, you're missing out. There's some of the juiciest questions happen when we're not recording. So be sure to check out our next podcast. You can learn more at thehapticsclub.com. We've got a newsletter. Everything's shown there of all our guests. And you can, of course, join us at our next live chat every other week. We go live. And with that, let's jump into the chat. Thomas, thanks so much for joining us. It's great to have you here.
Happy to be here as well, Ashley. Thanks for the invite to everyone from the Haptics podcast, Haptics Club podcast. Super excited to join you today.
Brilliant. So let's kick off with an introduction. Can you just kind of introduce yourself to our audience, give them just a kind of a quick background of who you are and what you're up to?
Absolutely, my pleasure. So my name is Thomas. I'm a designer and creative technologist. I probably call myself. I have a very traditional design education. I studied industrial design a while ago in the southern part of Germany, then continued doing my master's, and within my master's degree, I went quite deep into haptics and multimodal interactions. That's where also Haptic Labs emerged at the end. Currently, I'm sitting in the northeast part of Germany in Dresden. And as you mentioned, I'm the founder of Haptic Labs, which is a platform developing all sorts of tools and goodies for the next iteration of hapticians to work with. And I'm also involved or have a nice collaboration going on over here in Dresden with the Technical University. So providing researchers with the proper tools from hardware to software to build prototypes for studies, etc.
Awesome. How did you originally get involved in haptics? We love a good haptics origin story. We've heard a lot of, Vincent Hayward, Oliver Schneider. Where's your origin story? How did that all happen? How'd you get into haptics?
Right. Very good story. I think I've been working with haptics for quite a while, even though I wasn't really obvious to it. It started basically looking into like how devices are being handled. So looking at the ergonomical perspective of products, for example, I had a lot of projects involving medical tools, instruments, and there it's fairly essential that it's very straightforward to use, very intuitive, and without even looking at the things you're having in your hand, you need to recognize how they are working. And from there, it somehow emerged, and I got a lot of interest into it, because also in every product, or in most of the products that we are facing in our everyday life, most of them are based on visual output. You have displays, maybe you have touchscreens, mostly without the haptic experience or feedback, or you have auditive feedback. But all of those devices are also fairly noisy and loud. They're screaming for your attention. And at some point, I also asked myself, like, why is that? Why is there the necessity for that type of interactions? And couldn't there be a work around that? And with that kind of mindset, I stumbled into the whole topic and thought, super interesting. Let's just take an afternoon to read like a one-pager, like a medium story, and then I know everything about it. But it turned out it's just a black hole at the end. And yeah, it's one rabbit hole after each other, but that's also what keeps me excited, because in the beginning it's super overwhelming, from psychology to physiology to electronics to mechanics to coding, etc. But with kind of each step that you're digging deeper into it, you realize how many opportunities you have there and where they are lying around you. And so there's just so many stuff to explore, from more traditional, like instruments, or I don't know, like everyday objects, furniture. We have a helmet, so not only looking at the smartphone. And yeah, with every more expertise, you tend to discover more opportunities, and that's how I ended up where I am today, I guess.
That's awesome. I love how you described what it's like to start into haptics. Yeah, it's like, oh, I'll just learn a little bit, and then all of a sudden you're like, either I've made a huge mistake or I'm going to be here for days, months, weeks, and years. Very cool. Thanks for sharing
For
that, Thomas.
someone already 10 years.
Yeah. Yes.
Cool. Then I think it's area of expertise, right, Ashley? Yeah, fantastic. You're mine now. So we prepared quite a few questions, so I don't know if we can go through all of them, but super excited about that. So what was really the initial kick that wanted to move on from your discovery and passion into making a business out of that?
Mm-hmm. It's a very good question, because in comparison to a lot of other startups, I would say Haptic Labs didn't emerge out of the necessity, like from myself, to build a business in the end. But it was very much based on my experience as a designer. I dug into like haptic feedback and what it takes to build it, and talk to a lot of people, try to find experts in the field. But kind of the common feedback was that it's just so difficult and time consuming, and that's one of the major reasons, in my opinion, that it's rarely found also in everyday things. And I thought, like, now I'm getting the expertise for myself, but actually I also want to share it with other people. And because there's just so many topics, in the end, it's very much like I don't want to say a lifetime job, but it is a full-time job to do it. So also with kind of the vision in my head, or the aim to share the learnings that I achieved and make the whole field more accessible, not only to designers, but also to researchers, to artists, to engineers, etc. That's where the idea of forming Haptic Labs as a business basically emerged, because people also came to me. They saw I had like my learnings published on the Haptic Labs website, and wanted to learn more. And then I thought, well, why not try to do it as a full-time position? I'm not doing it full-time, to be honest at this moment, but maybe in the close future. But really, the vision was to share all my learnings, to enable other people to work with the topic. And yeah, because there was the necessity and the need, I thought, let's give it a try, basically.
I like the approach, like experiment. That's so designer. It's fantastic. So building last question on the business, I promise. It's it's my theory. I don't know if it's true or not, that haptics companies usually fails a bit more than every other company. So I started to ask to every folks in the haptic industry is, well, how you plan to make money, basically. So what's your plan for making money with a haptics lab? If there is one, you can be, I know, this is just for fun and I do it for education purposes, let's say.
Right. Maybe coming back from my story, being honest, I'd love to just share everything I'm doing for free with everyone, and just to amplify, the market, but that's not how this world works. So what we're trying to do, or what our take on it is, to really build like an ecosystem around haptics to get people started. So now we are not only developing the UI, the software to design the haptics, but also provide the hardware to play it back, to attach the actuators. But then the third part is also the knowledge itself. And we are really hoping by combining those three assets to leverage that kind of content and enable future hapticians with it. So yeah, we are currently in a beta phase, beta status to evaluate what we are doing. It looks fairly promising, but of course you'll never know. That's the startup world, the startup risk, how the next year will look like. But our idea is to share kind of a set of tools to put into the hands of the next of students, of designers, etc., to just get going and prototype their ideas, build physical, functional demonstrators, evaluate them with the users, and then also take it into a product in the end. That's the basic idea behind it.
So basically, you plan to charge for the tools, or you plan to charge for the license to use the results of the use of your tools? Exactly. The tools or the license?
Oh, sorry. It will be a mix of
mix
it.
Of the two.
It depends a bit on the toolkit's variant, like what options are in there and who is using it. Will it be for research purpose, for an educational purpose, or is it for a commercial purpose? So there will be both sides, because still my vision is to make it as accessible as possible, and that not only comes with the part of being highly intuitive, but also affordable in the end. So we have both worlds, which differ in the functionality in the end.
Looks fantastic and super promising. I'm looking forward to see how the growth will come in the future. So let's get back to a little bit more your bread and butters. So really, we like to ask the T-stake to designer, which is how can really developers approach haptics and think about interactions in the same time? What's the thought process that they should use?
Mm-hmm. It's an extremely important question, because usually when talking to developers, not all of them, but a lot of them, they tend to, let's attach the actuator and make it buzz, and then we are done, and then put it into the injection mold and off to the market. But from my experience, I mean, it's developing a haptic interaction is fairly similar to developing visual feedback or an auditory feedback. So it goes through the design process, and it's very much a necessity to develop an intuitive interaction and an interaction that the user in the end will appreciate or will also like to use. So you have to go through certain phases. You have to do your research, analyze the context, who's the user that's going to use it, where is it positioned on the body, because it's a tremendous difference if you're developing a glove, like a feedback for a glove, or for your toe, for your head, for your back, or you want to put it into your table or whatever. So kind of the environment, the object, what's the age group, where will you feel it? Is it like embedded into a device that's already vibrating or producing some mechanical noise? Then you have to compensate for it. So there's a lot into it, and it's super important that you're getting a very deep dive into the context where the feedback is going to happen. And if you've then done your research, you have to also define what the interaction is going to be. Is it like a highly important feedback? Is it mission critical? Is it a notification? And how many type of feedbacks will there be? How many cues, etc. And then after you've set that part, you have to start also prototyping the whole thing. And then super important, as soon as possible, give it into the hands of people or users in the end. And even then, when you've went through this not so straightforward process, you always have to have back in your head that you need to do a certain amount of iterations. It's also something companies or developers, even designers often forget. That's usually it's not the first iteration that go through and then you can put it into a serial production, but you have to evaluate and then go back into your definition of the design, maybe even one step back into the context. But yeah, basically the earlier you're defining what you want to have, in the end, the easier it will get. Because I've also done the same mistake in the beginning of my career, to just, take an actuator, throw any type of signal to it and just see what will happen. But honestly, it will never work out that you'll create intuitive feedback and one that's so straightforward, so simplified, that the user will also appreciate it. And I think that's the kind of major part you have to be aware of to go through this process. And of course, you also need to have the tools for that. And our vision, as mentioned a bit earlier, is to kind of make this walkthrough a bit easier through like plug and play tools, no code environments, etc. And yeah, hope that answered the topic, the question from you, Eric.
I think we can talk hours and hours about that. So we love to document the take of each one that comes under the grills of the Haptics Club. And fantastic answer, by the way. Thanks. So let's stay in this topic. And you mentioned, like, say, you shared like some valuable lesson, one valuable lesson that you learned during this discussion till now. That not being too straightforward, let's say, to allow yourself the opportunity to explore. Are there others lessons that you picked up along the way that you would like to share for who would like to approach the use of haptics in their products or softwares?
Mm. Well, there are a lot of topics along this path. It's not so easy to say, like, maybe choosing the right actuator is the most important one. Probably not, but it will have a very big impact. But I think another essential point is also that haptics won't solve everything. Just because it will vibrate or give some feedback in the end, it doesn't need to be the best solution for it. And I think it's a very interesting point in time, because also more and more users, more companies are getting aware of it. But you also have to keep in mind that it doesn't become too gadgety in the end, because the same applies, like the same effect you can have with visual or auditory feedback that is overloading the senses or the capabilities of the users. You can do the same with haptic feedback. So keeping like, how do you say, like the stuff in your head. I'm missing the right term at this moment. Sorry about that. But being a bit not critical, yeah, maybe that's the term, about what you want to achieve, evaluate it, and then also be open to leave haptics out in the end if it doesn't make sense. I think it's an essential point. But again, I don't want to be too negative on this point. I think there are so many opportunities if haptic feedback is done in the right way, haptic design.
We say in Italy, you are destroying an open door. Yeah, we agree on that. Even if we always say most of the time it's not a good idea to put haptics, but that's another point. Fantastic. So thanks for the great answer. And I would like, just before giving back the mic to Ashley for the future of haptics, asking one other question. I mean, you're working in use prototyping phases. I think one of the most exciting and fun part in the global haptics implementation, when you start to then work with mechanics in the device, that's a terrible one, and nobody wants to do this because it takes a lot of time, and yes, everything is rattling, so it's terrible. But what are really the top 3 surprising or unconventional uses for haptics that you've seen or you've prototyped?
Mm-hmm. Super interesting question. The first one that pops into my mind is I was working on a project where it was about a helmet that you put on, and to tell the user, basically it was a navigation system. And you know that the traditional one or solution you always see is put an actuator to the left and to the right, and then you should be able to guide someone, which also, by the way, isn't that straightforward. But the solution, or one way I tried to conquer it, was to not use vibrotactile feedback, so just vibration, but to twist the skin on the top of your head. So I was putting a servo motor on top of it, and then by twisting the skin, the user was feeling where to navigate to. And that was a super interesting evaluation, because people didn't know what they will expect or will perceive. So that was a lot of fun. But yeah, it's also something when you're talking about tactile interactions, tactile feedback, everyone's thinking about vibration, but actually like pinching the skin, temperature, or movement along the skin it's the same topic, but of course from a mechanical perspective, etc., it's way more complicated than using an off-the-shelf vibration motor. So I think that was one of the most memorable experience from the beginning. Another one, I'd say, I mentioned earlier the target group or the user that's experiencing it. And I had another project that had like the target group was a bit was I think between around 50 years old, 50 to 60 years old, and the level of perception of like tactile stimulus on the hand it declines the older you're getting. And there, for the first time, I also had users that didn't get what I tried to convince them that they should feel. They just didn't feel it at all, or it was super uncomfortable, more like electric shock in a way. So that was also very interesting. There are definitely ways to work around that. But again, you have to be just you have to keep it in mind that the limits of the body, not only from like the perception, how many receptors are there, but also the type of age groups, the type of people you have in front of you. So maybe that was also an interesting learning in the end. And just to pick a third one, I'd say one learning was also that the how you're perceiving haptic feedback, and like it works by comparing to your previous experience, your learnings that you've acquired through being a small child to being an adult, like on your everyday interactions, basically. So every one of us also has a different set of templates or libraries inside of your head, inside of your body. And so it can be also fairly different how people are perceiving the type of feedback. So one learning for me was also, again, to keep it as simple as possible, not try to reinvent the wheel, try to pick up on other guidelines. It's also a super interesting topic. Guidelines for haptic feedback, a lot of great stuff is being developed. I think you also talked about that during recent episodes. But for example, take inspiration from auditory feedback. If something is rising, it's positive. If it's declining, it's rather negative. And again, don't try to reinvent the wheel. Try to make super complex feedback that takes like 10 seconds or something, but keep it short and simple, and people will appreciate it, and also be able to react on it in a very intuitive manner in the end.
Super insightful. Thanks a lot for the nice answer. I love skin stretch technologies. I use them since a long time, and I'm super convinced that they have a space in the future, and because there's low bandwidth, so you're not overloading with. We are just gently giving an information. We don't talk about that next time. I leave the mic to Ashley for our third part, the future of haptics.
Awesome. Super exciting. All right. Thomas, I think the first question we'd love to know is where you see haptics being used in the future that's maybe like the most exciting to you. So it could be like gaming, VR, training, XR. Is there a particular space where you're like, oh, this is going to get real good?
Mm-hmm. Right. I think it's rather obvious from what I mentioned a bit earlier that I'm excited about like new opportunities in your everyday life. So I'm really much focused on what's haptics outside also of gaming, of smartphones, etc. To take inspiration from that end, but then also put it into other objects. And there's so many opportunities. Again, we see it slowly emerging in the automotive sector. It makes a lot of sense because, because of the safety issues, etc. But what I'm also super excited is to integrate it actually, for example, in my home, in my table, in my chair, to create like new types of interactions. What if my chair will vibrate if someone knocks at the door, or I don't know, maybe I have a buzzing bed that wakes me up in the morning. Not sure if that's super comfortable or not, but I'd be very excited to explore that type of field. And maybe on the other hand, also to augment the skill of people. There's a lot of research going on in the medical area, for example. It's a very big challenge to communicate if you're working in minimal invasive OR, missing the term over here. What is it? Minimal invasive stuff that the surgeon is doing. Sorry about that. It's very difficult because they're so focused on experience, like the tactile stimulus from your fingertips, and then you have an instrument between your patient and your fingertips. And there can be a lot of opportunities in there to make it more efficient, but also make it more secure, kind of augmenting the skills also of the surgeon, for example.
Love that. That's awesome. Yeah, it's interesting to hear you say implementing it into like everyday objects, but at the same time, it's like there's also the trade-off between what makes sense for haptics, what makes it useful, what makes it insightful, what makes it kind of enchanting. What, or maybe just like a kind of a quick perspective from you of like how do you decide on something? It kind of, does it go back to context and the user and what you're trying to achieve? Like where does that kind of stem from? Just for people who maybe are trying to like get caught up, they're like, well, do I use it or don't I use it, Thomas? Share your wisdom, share your ninja ways.
Super good point. And yeah, I can just agree. I also don't want to live in a world where every object is buzzing and vibrating because that's the least I want to achieve. But it's a very good question and not something you can directly answer, I would say, because every object is very different. Every product is completely different. You can't just take like the one haptic design you've developed for, I don't know, your flower pot. Probably doesn't make sense, but then transfer it into your computer mouse or something. So you have to look at that in a separate way. And how I go about it usually is like analyze the functionality that you have in the product itself at this moment, but then also think about, are there any challenges? The perfect way is actually you have a challenge that you identify with a product interaction from a user and then think about how to solve it. And if haptic feedback is the way, it's the perfect scenario. If not, then it's also a perfect takeaway. But usually, you have to map it with the functionality you have. And the next step will be to evaluate it with a user together to see if there is actually a benefit from it. It's a hard lesson to learn, I think, because hapticians are usually also super excited about their field, and they tend to say, well, this is such a good thing. It will be a tremendous addition. But still, if the user won't appreciate it, if it won't work, then it's not worth looking into it. So you have to keep that loop ongoing, I'd say.
Awesome. That was super insightful. Thanks for that, Thomas. Yeah, it's a little bit of a tough question, but I think that was a brilliant answer of you're coming at it from trying to solve a problem. And whatever outcome that is, whether it's haptics or it's lights or whatever that is, that's really great perspective. And the next question, the one that we just love to ask, which is, where do you see haptics in the next 5 to 10 years? And you can kind of take it from whichever industry or perspective you want, but 5 to 10 years, what do you got?
Right. I'm super excited because I think at this point in time, a lot of things are coming together, at least from my experience or my perspective. I haven't been in the game as long as Eric and Ashley, you two, but at least for me, it feels like a lot of things are merging at this moment. Like technology is becoming more affordable. Research is making great progress. I think Hasti Saifi, during one of the episodes, mentioned like to make the research outcome more not affordable, but more accessible. What are the learnings? What are proper guidance for haptic design, etc. And with also haptic feedback being a bit more popular in the consumer electronics side, etc., also companies are becoming more aware this is a nice opportunity. People are appreciating it. Maybe it's now worth to look closer into it and also take a risk into evaluating the benefit, the value from that. So with that being said, I'm rather confident that within the next 5 to 10 years, a lot of products will benefit from haptic feedback. I'm really wishing, or I really wish that the first step also like novices, students, makers, but also researchers, designers, etc., will have the proper tools, but also the knowledge, etc., to explore the field, because I think that's also something missing at this moment. You can't just go on Behance or put into Google what is great haptic design, show me objects, but you won't be able to experience it, and that's very like a lack of inspiration over there. And I would really wish for like by getting more people into the field to grow the attention to it, but also show the opportunities, and then repeating a bit myself, but to ease haptic feedback into everyday objects. I think that's the big thing that I'm excited about. Also, besides VR, AR, smartphones, etc., but take advantage of it in a good way and where it makes sense. But then also to create more intuitive interactions, more tangible, quiet interactions.
Awesome. That's great. Eric, did you have something you were going to say? No? We could jam on that for probably a very long time. We are going to wrap up this particular episode. Of course, we've got questions happening. Before we do, and before I kind of sign off, I want to give you, Thomas, an opportunity to, is there something you're working on that you want to talk about? And how can people find you and learn more about what you're up to?
Thanks, Ashley. So what we're currently doing at Haptic Labs, I mentioned it earlier, but we're trying to develop tools to make the market or the working with haptic feedback more easy, more accessible, etc. And I'm super excited that we're growing the team and about to release, or we released a beta version, but it's a private state at this moment. But by kind of midsummer, end of this year, release a public version for it. If someone's interested in getting an early access to it, feel free to reach out. Either through LinkedIn, I'm rather active over there, or send me a mail at thomas@hapticlabs.io. I'm always super happy to chat, learn about different needs, different challenges, different topics, projects, and super glad to support people and learning more about haptics and supporting them and building tangible physical working prototypes.
Awesome. Love that. Thank you so much, Thomas, for joining us. Everyone stick around. If you're curious, hapticlabs.io, so many amazing insights, things that will take you ages to find on Google, as Thomas mentioned. So that's fantastic. Great tools for developers to learn more. So check it out, hapticlabs.io. And then just jumping back in here, we've reached the end of kind of a recorded session. So anyone who's listening now, you're missing out on some juicy questions. We've got audience questions popping up. We've got some that were sent in before, which is awesome. And this happens every other week. We invite amazing guests like Thomas Müller, who have insights in the industry from all different areas, automotive, VR, gaming, everywhere in the space, which is super exciting. So a reminder to folks, our next guest is actually going to be Kyle from Non-Polynomial. He's working in the adult space, which is one we don't get to talk about often, but is an exciting opportunity for folks who, especially on the user interaction side. So exciting, especially and with COVID and being disconnected, it's a space that's really important to talk about. And of course, you can catch us at the Haptic Lab. Sorry, you can catch us at thehapticsclub.com. Got too excited. Just hawking Thomas's website there, thehapticsclub.com, where you can find out who our next guests are going to be. You can RSVP, and we've got a newsletter so that you can stay in touch with what we're up to and what's happening next. And when things go live on things like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, we're everywhere. So be sure to check it out.
And the Discord channel. Yeah, we have a growing community now, and we have new things which is popping up. It's the Journal Club. There is a reading club for the scientific journals that popped up in the community. So be sure to subscribe to the Discord. You find it on the website, and join the conversation. Thanks a lot, Thomas. It was a fantastic pleasure to have you here, and we wish you to have you back in the future.
Absolutely, it was my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, Ashley and Eric, and rest of the amazing Haptics Club team.